6 candidates have been cleared to run in Iran's presidential race. Who are they? How do they differ? And what role will they play? The vote is less than a month after the death of the former president. So what's at stake this time round? And how could the outcome affect the country's role in the region? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Iran is gearing up for a presidential election on June the 28th. It's earlier than expected following the death of President Ebrahim Raisi in a helicopter crash in May. 6 candidates have been approved to run. All are long-serving members of Iran's political establishment. The winner will have to contend with a struggling economy and ongoing challenges of American sanctions. So how much choice does this field of candidates represent? And with voter turnout sinking to all-time lows, will Iranians be inspired to cast their votes now? We'll go to our panel in just a moment. First, Fintan Monahan has this report.
80 candidates sought to run in Iran's presidential elections. Only 6 were approved. The vetting process by the Guardian Council in recent years has ensured the removal of anyone who might challenge the establishment. Among those accepted, Mohammed Bagher Ghalibaf. He's the Speaker of Parliament, a former mayor of Tehran, and a former commander in the Revolutionary Guard. The current mayor of the capital, Alireza Zakani, is also a candidate, as is former nuclear negotiator Saeed Jalili. Many major figures were cut from the race, including former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and former Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani. This election is happening much earlier than expected. It follows the death of President Ebrahim Raisi in a helicopter crash in May. After that incident, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei told his people Raisi's death would not affect the running of the state. A reassurance and a reminder that his office is where final authority ultimately lies.
Be
assured that there will be no disruption in the work of the country. Officials have been very busy with their work since this evening after hearing the news of the incident. We have given them the necessary recommendations and the affairs of the country are proceeding regularly.
Iran's next president will have to contend with a struggling economy and nuclear sanctions imposed by the United States. But disillusionment is also growing among voters. The last election had a similarly narrow field of candidates. The result was the lowest turnout since the founding of the Iranian state. Fintan Monahan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests now. And in Tehran, Abbas Aslani, a senior research fellow at the Tehran-based think tank Centre for Middle East Strategic Studies. From London, Saban Vakil, a director of the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House. And here in Doha, we're joined by Mehran Kamrava. He's Professor of Government at Georgetown University in Qatar. Very warm welcome to all of you. Abbas, let's start by getting an idea of how Iranians feel about these elections and their reactions, their initial reactions to who's on the ballot.
Well, Laura, in quite a few days, the atmosphere from the funeral ceremonies has shifted to political campaigns. This presidential election was expected to happen next year, but it is going to be held, within a couple of weeks. And it was supposed to take place after the elections in the United States. Some impacts maybe was expected as a result of, the elections in the United States, as there have been discussions about Donald Trump, likely running for the election. But this precedes that election and independent of the American, elections. And we are seeing that, some candidates being qualified, some being disqualified. And I think in the coming days, the public, those who care about the elections will be watching the programs on TV, specifically those live televised debates among the candidates, to see that who can somehow best fit this this chair in order to be the next president.
OK, some qualified, most disqualified. Sanam, let's have a look at who did not make the list. And a couple of the better-known names, at least outside of Iran, are the ex-president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and the moderate Ali Larijani. Why, for example, did they not make the cut?
Well, I think both candidates have particular portfolios. Former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is a controversial figure, one who left office not on the best of terms with Iran's supreme leader and the political establishment. He's also perhaps seen as a threat and very much a populist that could upend a conservative control of Iran's elected and unelected institutions. Ali Larijani, it's interesting that he is called a moderate today. He is still, in my mind, very much a conservative, but someone who has become much more pragmatic and perhaps more open in his engagement domestically in Iran, but also internationally. He's still loyal to the system, but he's perceived, because of perhaps his political inclinations, to be someone that might also challenge the system and the conservative dominance of that system from within. His brother, also Sadegh Larijani, was head of the judiciary. He was disqualified from Iran's Assembly of Expert elections, not obtaining any seats there as well. So the family that was long very important in Iran's political establishment has been pushed to the wayside. I will also add that the number of women that put themselves forward also were not qualified to run for president by the Guardian Council. And women to date, over 4 decades, have yet to receive Guardian Council approval to run in any election.
Mehran, perhaps you can give us some insight as to how the Guardian Council chooses these people. I mean, as Sanam says, anyone who challenges the system has not made this final list. What are the parameters for who is deemed acceptable as a candidate? And can you give us a bit of an idea as to how they've narrowed over the years?
That's a really good question, but one that we really don't know the answer to. The Guardian Council operates in tremendous opacity and lack of transparency. And from one election to another, it doesn't appear as if they have any consistent criteria. Obviously, the Guardian Council coordinates very closely with the Office of the Supreme Leader in terms of who is and who's not qualified to run for the presidency. And what we've seen is, as you mentioned, over the last several years, an increasing narrowing of the political space. And so increasingly, the Guardian Council has been very instrumental in what in Iran is commonly perceived as engineering elections in order to produce particular outcomes. We saw this in 2021, and we appear to be seeing it again now in 2024.
Abbas, why are no reformers on the ballot this time round?
Laura, I think we have a reformist candidate now in the list. You know, the process for registering for the president in the country is relatively accessible. Even candidates with a moderate parliament or executive management can register. And the initial, number of the candidates can swell to a significant number. But in the vetting process, normally the Guardian Council, narrows the field dramatically. But the point, I think, the crux of the matter is not the quantity of the candidates, but I think that is about the disqualification of certain candidates in addition to the political leanings of the those who have been officially sanctioned by the council. Presently, 6 candidates, among the majority belongs to the conservatives, but there are 2 candidates who have collaborated with the moderates or reformists, or even are officially considered to be a reformist, candidate. Reformists have been critical of the process whereby the Guardian Council has disqualified, a number of candidates. But today, with the qualification of Masoud Pezeshkian, the reformist member of parliament, they seem to be more content had it, been Larijani being qualified to run, because they wanted someone to be in their ranks to represent them. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the current, member of parliament, Pezeshkian, in this race. And let's not forget that the former president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, when Hashemi Rafsanjani was disqualified by the Guardian Council, in the early polls, he had, a support of less than 5%. But in the debates, in the political campaign, he tried to somehow rise himself to be president in the country with securing more than 50% of the votes. So I think, this election is a bit too early to call. And however, some say that the competition mostly takes place between the conservatives. But, the presence of high-profile conservative, candidates in this process, in addition to those new candidates, can somehow indicate a kind of runoff or at least increase the chance of those reformist candidates in case they are able to galvanize the reformist base.
OK. Sanam, let's look at Masoud Pezeshkian, who Abbas mentions there. How reformist is he?
Well, Pezeshkian is an interesting candidate. He is a regime insider, with reformist leanings. He has been a health minister, but longtime parliamentarian as well. And he has Azeri ethnic roots. So, if you weave all of this together, he's certainly on the more left side of the system. I think it's important to contextualize his candidacy within the narrowing of the political space in Iran that Mehran referred to. Over the past number of elections, including the most recent parliamentary elections that were just held over the spring, turnout was particularly low at 41% in Raisi's presidential election. In 2021, turnout was also low. So allowing Pezeshkian to run in this election could be about two things, effectively. Building bridges back to the reformist factions that have been marginalized formally from government, but also to try to generate some public support after protests and real distance between the political establishment and the general public. Some do call his candidacy tokenistic. It remains to be seen if he has the ability to mobilize Iranians to come out to vote. And secondly, how much independence he has is something we always have to weigh. The president isn't really an independent, free mobilizer within the system. He is a part of the system. And so, you have to put that into context as well.
Mehran, what do you think about that? When you see Pezeshkian on the list, why, first of all, do you think he is there? And is his presence going to be enough to galvanise the electorate and therefore legitimise the election process?
Even in the 2021 elections, there was at least one candidate who was considered to be reformist. So the Guardian Council doesn't want to appear as if it's only allowing conservatives or people generally known as conservative to run for the election. Whether or not Pezeshkian can galvanize voters or anyone else for that matter, I think we'll have to see over the next couple of weeks. In particular, what we've seen in past elections is that live televised debates have been quite consequential in exciting voters, in allowing candidates to articulate a platform as much as possible, in allowing candidates to really go after each other. And so in the past, at least up until 2021, presidential debates were quite consequential in either making or breaking candidates. And we already have in Iran debates that are scheduled. And I think those debates will be quite telling in terms of the ability of the candidates to excite, to speak to voters, to excite voters, and to mobilize their supposed base.
Abbas, give us again the view from the ground. In your circles, is there much enthusiasm for the vote? Do you think your friends, your family, people you know are going to be watching these debates and get excited about this ballot?
Well, I think one of the difficult tasks for the government will be to increase the level of turnout, in order to, specifically when it comes to the moderates and reformists, because if they want to mobilize their base, they will need to encourage and convince those who have refrained from voting. In the past, former President Hassan Rouhani, he tried to use the issue of engagement with the West and clinching a nuclear agreement with the 6 world countries in order to encourage the voters to come to the ballot boxes. But this time around, I think that will be very difficult. And if a figure like Masoud Pezeshkian wants to win, they have to do this. However, this is going to be very difficult. As it was mentioned earlier, part of we have been the case as well in the past, that part of the population or the electorate that does not have the decision to vote now, they might be somehow provoked to do so in the coming days by witnessing the political campaign or the live televised debates. But I think this time the people in the country are not waiting for a kind of, let's say, savior or a messiah that will resolve all the issues overnight or in a very short time. But I think what they are expecting this time to see is a incremental process and procedure whereby they will see a gradual resolution of those, specifically economic problems. And, that's why I think being a reformist or conservative will not that much work in this round. And if, those gray zone of the people, if they decide to come to vote, they will be searching someone who, talks beyond these slogans, and they will think that they will be hearing a kind of rationality from his words. That's why I think those, debates and the words and remarks that are going to be made in the coming days will matter a lot.
Okay. Sanam, whether Pezeshkian or indeed key leading conservative figures, I'm looking at Mohammed Bagher, Ghalibaf and Saeed Jalili, whoever gets in, to what extent are we just going to see a continuation of Iran's policies?
That, I think, is a really important question to unpack. The Iranian president, of course, is important traditionally because he is elected by the people after this vetting process. And so there is this perception that there's legitimacy behind the office. And of course, the system works across Iran's institutions, and that's been important. The president sets the tone of the administration, particularly within domestic politics and on the economy. But on foreign policy on its own, the president doesn't have independent influence. Certainly, he lends his voice and opinion to a consensus-based process that takes place in the Supreme National Security Council. And there, the president sits alongside representatives from Parliament, the Supreme Leader's Office, the IRGC, and other institutions, and they provide consensus-based decisions and suggestions on how to move forward to respond to Iran's regional as well as international challenges. So, inside the country, there is a degree of independence on the economics, and I think that's going to be a really important key point for this election and for voters inside Iran. But on the foreign policy front, I expect, particularly with so many conservatives and leading ones, the prevailing foreign policy dynamics will not shift too much going forward.
Okay, so a key election issue will be the economy. Mehran, every candidate then will be offering his way to improve Iran's economy, which is really in the doldrums. What ways are available to candidates to make Iran's economy more stable, if indeed they can?
Well, that's the important point. Can they indeed? one of the main obstacles to economic improvement in Iran is the punishing comprehensive sanctions that the EU, the United States have imposed on the country. And I think, of course, barring any progress on the nuclear question, then I don't think we'll see any sanctions relief or even any discussion of sanctions relief. So that's one of the main areas in which the Iranian economy is suffering from: lack of Western investments, inability of Iranian businesses to export abroad freely, lack of meaningful venues for globalization of the economy and exchange with other countries. And I think until and unless that main hurdle is removed, the Iranian economy will continue to significantly underperform.
And Abbas, another key issue within Iran, of course, has been the women's protests that erupted in September 2022. They have been cracked down upon now, to all extents and purposes being crushed. And yet now there is this hijab law that has come into place. To what extent is that being enforced on the street? And do you see any change to that, regardless of who gets into the presidency?
Well, that's, Laura, why, this time in this round of elections, in addition to the foreign policy related issues, meaning the sanctions, as well as the economic issues in the country, we might be hearing from those candidates on issues related to hijab, internet freedom. And, that's right. Maybe people like Pezeshkian, they have been in the system, they have been in the parliament, but it does not necessarily mean that they will share similar ideas with the other conservative candidates on those issues. And we have been seeing that those, candidates among specifically the reformist front and faction, as well as the moderates, they have been critical of the policies adopted by the system, specifically by a conservative government. So I think that that's going to be one of the hot topics, specifically in the political campaign, in the press conferences that these candidates are going to have, or even in the live televised debates. I think this can be an issue that they can, most specifically the reformist candidate, maneuver on. So this is an area that might somehow encourage some part of that gray zone, those electorates, in order to be convinced to go to the ballot boxes. There might be some chances in that. So that's why, in some ways it can make those debates controversial, but in some ways create a kind of atmosphere whereby people can be a bit more hopeful that they have a new voice or a different voice on those topics, and they can go and vote for that candidate. However, I believe that increasing the level of turnout is going to be a very difficult job to do.
OK, Sanam, how hopeful can people really be of hearing a new voice? We've got the Conservatives winning big in parliamentary elections earlier this year. Do reformists hold any key positions now in Iran?
No meaningful ones, and they're not sitting in any of the key decision-making rooms. And I think that in itself is the problem for the public. There's a keen awareness that reform on its own, or the platform of reform, hasn't, over a number of decades now, really delivered meaningful social, political, or economic change for Iranians. So Pezeshkian on his own, even with liberal ideas, doesn't have the authority to challenge a hardline parliament or a very conservative system that is in the process of a very gradual transition and needs that political cohesion to manage what's to come on the horizon. I struggle to think that it will be hard to achieve the higher turnout that we saw in the period of President Rouhani's election or President Ahmadinejad's elections, where turnouts were, a high of 70%. And if the system is lucky, they can see 40% come out to vote, and that will be legitimate enough for this surprise election and an opportunity for a number of candidates to elevate themselves within the system and try to have impact in a system that doesn't really encourage or promote independent change.
Mehran, when you've got this increasing disconnect between the state and society, the people of Iran, to what extent do we risk instability in the country?
Does this system really care about political participation? I think that's a key question. And sometimes I don't think the answer to that is that the system really cares. It goes through the motions, particularly since 2021. It goes through the motions of having elections, but the system appears to have the diehard support of something around 15 to 20% of the population. And so long as that core support base remains loyal to the ideology of the Islamic Republic, to what the Islamic Republic stands for, it doesn't appear as if the system really cares about the other 65 to 80%.
Okay, Abbas, just the final word to you then. Do you think that people do feel connected to the system, that the system cares about them?
Well, there have been problems in the country that people are unhappy with, but, to make a point that, this will make no change if they, vote for a different candidate is quite simplistic, because even the mere idea of disqualifying some candidates, is a kind of admission, even by the establishment itself, that, having a new and a different president in office could impact, even the administration in the country, and having a president who has quite, at least relatively, I'm not talking a significant or dramatic differences in executing those policies. He will be the one to, introduce the members of the cabinet in order to execute the laws passed by the parliament. And he will introduce the members of the Supreme National Security Council, which is, the majority is being held by the cabinet members and the government.
Okay. So it still will be an interesting election to keep an eye on. That's it for our discussion today. Abbas, Aslani, Sanam, Vakil and Mehran Kamrava, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.